Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me for Chapter 1, Section 1 of Limits of Power, titled The Crisis of Profligacy. What does profligacy mean? It essentially means gross self-indulgence. So if you don't know what that necessarily means, it means he's going to take, and by he I mean Andrew Bacevich, he's going to take a massive swipe at capitalism and the consumer and consumerism, really, and the consumer economy and what that does to our society and how hard it makes and presses upon our society's ability to fulfill what we deem certain rites of passage within class of our society, right? Once again, for the love, you do not have to agree with everything here. You don't have to believe within everything that he says, but do understand that it's an important argument that if you were ever going to counter, or I should say, if you were ever going to counter, all right, you need to understand, because in any type of democratic debate, you cannot counter an argument unless you have an understanding of what that argument is, right? So here we go. Once again, I will mention, highlight this, stop there, and hey, those highlighted sections are the order of the answers to the worksheet I assigned you. Just throwing it out there. All right. Today, no less than in 1776, a passion for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness remains at the center of America's civic theology. The Jeffersonian Trinity summarizes our common inheritance, defines our aspirations, and provides the touchstone for our influence abroad. If you're wondering what the Jeffersonian Trinity is, that is a play on the Holy Trinity, right? The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Jeffersonian Trinity, Declaration of Independence, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That is the Jeffersonian Trinity, according to Bacevich, right? Yet if Americans still cherish the sentiments contained in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, they have over time radically revised their understanding of those inalienable rights. Today, individual Americans use their freedom to do many worthy things. Some read, write, paint, sculpt, compose, and play music. Others build, restore, and preserve. Still others attend plays, concerts, and sporting events, visit their local multiplexes, IM each other incessantly. That means instant message for when this was popular in the early 2000s. He would mean Instagram, things like that. TikTok is what he would mean now. And join communities of the like-minded in an ever-growing array of virtual worlds. They also pursue innumerable hobbies, worship, tithe, and in commendably large numbers. Attend to the needs of the less fortunate. Yet none of these in themselves define what it means to be an American in the 21st century. If one were to choose a single word to characterize that identity, it would have to be more. Highlight this. For the majority of contemporary Americans, the essence of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness centers on a relentless personal quest to acquire, to consume, to indulge, and to shed whatever constraints there might interfere with those endeavors. Stop there. A bumper sticker, a sardonic motto, and a change dating from the age of the Woodstock have recast the Jeffersonian Trinity in modern vernacular. Whoever dies with the most toys wins. Shop till you drop. If it feels good, do it. It would be misleading to suggest that every American has surrendered to this ethic of self-gratification. Resistance to its demands persists and take many forms. Yet dissenters, intent on curbing the American penchant for consumption and self-indulgence, are fighting a rearguard action, valiant perhaps but unlikely to reverse the tide. The ethic of self-gratification has firmly entrenched itself in the defining feature of American way of life. The point is neither to deplore nor to celebrate this fact, but simply to acknowledge it. Others have described, dissected, and typically bemoaned the cultural and even moral implications of this development. Few, however, have considered how an American preoccupation with more has affected U.S. relations with the rest of the world. Yet the foreign relation implication of our present-day penchant for consumption and self-indulgence are almost entirely negative. Highlight this. Over the past 6 decades, efforts to satisfy spiraling consumer demand have given birth to a condition of profound dependency. Stop there. The United States may still remain the mightiest power in the world has ever seen, but the fact is that Americans are no longer masters of their own fate. The ethic of self-gratification threatens the well-being of the United States. It does so not because Americans have lost touch with some mythical Puritan habits of hard work and self-abnegation, but because it saddles us with costly commitments abroad that we are increasingly ill-equipped to sustain, while confronting us with dangers to which we have no ready response. As the prerequisites of American way of life have grown, they have outstripped the means available to satisfy them. Americans of an earlier generation worried about the bomber and missile gaps, both of which turned out to be fictitious. The present day, highlight this, the present day gap between requirements and the means available to satisfy those requirements is neither contrived nor imaginary. It is real and growing. This gap defines the crisis of American profligacy. Stop there. And so what he means by that, it's nighttime, so I had to switch to water, is we need a certain amount of things, a certain number of cars, a certain size house, a certain number of TVs, a certain, fancy model iPhone. We need all those things, right, in order to be a certain station within society. However, because we don't necessarily make all those in-house and we rely upon outside nations to make those things for us, which we then consume, it has made it harder for us to acquire said things. And more importantly, as I mentioned in the last time with the introduction, when countries like India and China with vastly larger populations now have their own growing middle classes, which also require those things to define themselves as middle class, it makes competition for those products harder, right? Obviously, until COVID-19, probably the biggest example of that would be oil and gasoline, right? Prior to pandemic, which doesn't count, all right, you had gas and oil prices increasing, right? That's because there are more people in the global community competing for what is a finite resource. And that's what they mean by that, all right? I am, as we all are, I am just as much guilty of profligacy as anybody else, right? It's like I've told you 1,000 times. I'm going to drink my 20-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew while driving my 17 miles to the gallon F-150, one half mile, if you will, from my house to my school, even though I work in the same building as my wife, and she drives a separate car, which burns even more fuel. Why? Because I can. Because we have grown up in a society that says we can. Right? And it's interesting, because I think COVID-19 has exposed the weakness of American industry in that regard, because as we're not shipping in things from foreign nations like China as much as we used to because of, slow trade and shut down borders, we're starting to see shortages of things, right? And I don't just mean toilet paper. I mean electronics, right? And mass-produced consumer goods in general. So it's kind of interesting. I'm gonna sneeze, so I apologize. Here we go. Excuse me. All right. Anyway, power and abundance. Placed in a historical perspective, the triumph of this ethic of self-gratification hardly qualifies as surprise. The restless search for a buck and the ruthless elimination of anyone or anything standing in the way of doing so have long been central to the American character. During the United States in the 1830s, Alexis de Tocqueville, he was French, astute observer of the young republic, noted the feverish ardor of its citizens to accumulate. Yet even as typical American clutches at everything, the Frenchman wrote, he holds nothing fast, but soon loses his grasp to pursue fresh gratifications. However munificent his possessions, the American hungered for more, an obsession that filled him with anxiety, fear, and regret, and keeps his mind in ceaseless trepidation. Says the French European, by the way, who will soon enter his own version of imperialism, who just got done colonialism in the pursuit for more. Just throwing that out there, all right? Pot, kettle, black, Alexis. All right. Even in de Tocqueville's day, satisfying such yearnings, as well as easing anxieties and fears they evoked, had important policy implications. To quench their ardor, Americans looked abroad, seeking to extend the reach of U.S. power. The pursuit of fresh gratifications expressed itself collectively in an urge to expand, territorially and commercially. This expansionist project was already well begun when de Tocqueville's famed Democracy in America appeared. Most notably, through Jefferson's acquisition of the Louisiana Territory in 1803, Louisiana Purchase, and through ongoing efforts to remove or simply eliminate Native Americans, an undertaking that continued throughout the 19th century. Just to note, it wasn't just Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act when we were removing Native Americans. Remember, it happened long before that. And those that opposed Jackson early with his Indian Removal Act had supported Jeffersonian efforts to remove Native Americans. We're all guilty, everybody. We're all guilty. All right? No need to point fingers. All right. This expansionist project was already well begun when de Tocqueville's fame, I've already said that part, undertaking that continued throughout the 19th century. Preferring to remember their collective story somewhat differently, Americans looked to politicians to sanitize their past. When, in his 2005 inaugural address, George W. Bush identified the promulgation of freedom as the mission that created our nation, neoconservative, remember, conservatives after Reagan, hearts certainly beat a little faster, as they undoubtedly did when he went on to declare that America's great liberating tradition now required the United States to devote itself to ending tyranny in our world. Yet Bush was simply putting his own gloss on a time-honored conviction, ascribing to the United States a uniqueness of character and purpose. From its founding, America has expressed through its behavior and its evolution a providential purpose. Paying homage to, and therefore renewing, this tradition of American exceptionalism has long been one of the presidency's primary extra-constitutional obligations. Many Americans find such sentiments compelling. Yet, to credit the United States with possessing a liberating tradition is equivalent to saying that Hollywood has a tradition of artistic excellence. The movie business is just that, a business. Its purpose is to make money. If once in a while a studio produces a film of aesthetic value, that may be a cause for celebration, but profit, not with revealing truth and beauty, defies the purpose of the enterprise. I like this. Something of the same can be said for the enterprise that launched on July 4th, 1776. The hard-head lawyers, merchants, farmers, and slaveholding plantation owners gathered in Philadelphia that summer did not set out to create a church. They founded a republic. Their purpose was not to save mankind. It was to ensure that people like themselves enjoyed unencumbered access to the Jeffersonian Trinity. Stop there. And as I said way back in August, the American Revolution was not done and fought and created and sustained to create a new way of life. It was done to maintain a way of life that already existed. All right? Stop there. In the years that followed, the United States achieved remarkable success in making good on those aims, yet never during the course of American transformation from a small power to a great one did the United States exert itself to liberate others, absent an overriding perception that the nation had a large security or economic interest at stake. From time to time, although not nearly as frequently as we like to imagine, some of the world's unfortunates managed to, as a consequence, to escape from bondage. The Civil War did, for instance, produce emancipation, freeing the slaves. Yet to explain that conflagration of 1861 to 65 as a response to the plight of enslaved African Americans is to engage at best in its immense oversimplification. Near the end of World War II, GIs did liberate the surviving inmates of Nazi death camps. Yet, for those who directed the American war effort of 41 to 45, the fate of European Jews never figured as more than an afterthought. Creating the United States with a great liberating tradition distorts the past and obscures the actual motive force behind American politics in U.S. foreign policy. It transforms history into a morality tale, thereby providing a rationale for dodging mysterious moral analysis. To insist that the liberation of others has never been more than an ancillary motive of U.S. policy is not cynicism, it is a prerequisite to self-understanding. If the United States had a mission, it was not to liberate, but to expand. Of course, Theodore Roosevelt in 1899, as if explaining the self-evident to the obtuse, our whole national history has been one of expansion. TR spoke truthfully. The founders viewed stasis as tantamount to suicide. From the outset, Americans evinced a compulsion to acquire territory and extend their commercial reach abroad. How was expansion achieved? On this point, the historical record leaves no room for debate, by any means necessary. Depending upon the circumstances, the United States relied on diplomacy, hard bargaining, bluster, chicanery, intimidation, and naked coercion. We infiltrated land belonging to our neighbors and then brazenly proclaimed it our own. Mexican-American War. We harassed, filibustered, and when the situation called for it, launched full-scale invasions. We engaged in ethnic cleansing, at times, Native Americans. At times, we insisted that treaties be considered sacrosanct. There we go, sacrosanct. Again, Native Americans. On other occasions, we blithely jettisoned solemn agreements that had outlived their usefulness. As the methods employed varied, so too did the rationales offered to justify action. We touted our status as God's new chosen people, erecting a city upon a hill, Puritans, Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, destined to illuminate the world. He's going to come up again, just so you know. We acted at the behest of providential guidance, or respond to the urgings of our manifest destiny. We declared our obligation to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, or to uplift little brown brother. With Woodrow Wilson as our tutor, World War I, President of the United States, tutor, we shouldered our responsibility to show the way that to the nations of the world how they shall walk in the paths of liberty. I like this. Critics who derided these claims as bunkum, the young Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, prior to being president, during the war with Mexico, Mark Twain, American author, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, after the imperial adventures of 1898, Spanish-American War, Senator Robert La Follette, amid the war to end all wars, World War I, scored points but lost the argument because we fought all three of those wars, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I. Stop there. Periodically revised and refurbished, American exceptionalism, which implied exceptional American prerogatives, were only gained greater currency. When it came to action rather than talk, even the policymakers viewed them as most idealistic remained fixated on one overriding aim, enhancing American influence, wealth, and power. The record of U.S. foreign relations, from the earliest colonial encounters with Native Americans to the end of the Cold War, is neither uniquely high-minded nor uniquely hypocritical and exploitive. In this sense, the interpretations of America's past offered by both George W. Bush and Osama bin Laden fell equally wide of the mark. As a rising power, the United States adhered to the iron laws of international politics, which allow little space for altruism. If the tale of American expansion contains a moral theme at all, that theme is necessarily one of ambiguity. And we're going to get into that more in part 2, just because it makes it easier to upload these bad boys on YouTube. So I will see you in literally 30 seconds. Love you. See you later.